Thomas, thank you so much for
Oh,
agreeing to chat with me today.
thanks for having me.
100%. You are the author of The Autodidacts and How I Killed the Universal Man. If you've written other books, I'm unaware of them, so my apologies. Is that it? Those
That's
two?
it. Yeah,
All right.
just those two.
Well, I mean, that's an accomplishment. I don't mean to diminish that, like, oh, you've only written two books. That's
I
actually a
know.
lot of books. In any case, I've only, oh God, I wrote this down. I just said it, but in any case, I've only read How I Killed the Universal Man. So that's what I'd like to focus on today. I want to preface this conversation with a little bit of my own bullshit. I've been I've been slowing down my pace with this series the past 6 months or so. In the midst of that, I've been thinking a lot about how much I want to be involved in indie literature, so to speak. What is the point of writing these books that are not read by all that many people? What is the point of reviewing this kind of work or of having these kinds of conversations? I don't have a profound answer to any of those questions. I think my point of view is pretty typical in that I believe that most art practice is more or less a compulsion beyond a certain stage of being excited about one's own ideas. And on the consumption side of things, I find that curiosity often leads me to the more joyful parts of life. Though when I put extra pressure on myself to continually explore a niche subset of my interests for a very arbitrary reason, like a silly YouTube channel, this starts to feel a lot like homework, especially because this has nothing to do with my job or most of what I get up to on a day-to-day basis. I'm saying all this for a reason, and that is often when I start to feel jaded about something like contemporary art or literature, I am confronted by a work that excites me and reignites my passion for whatever drew me to this stuff in the first place. Your novel, How I Killed the Universal Man, is an example of one of these exciting works. So let's get
Thank you
into
so
it.
much. That's super kind of you to say.
Absolutely. Well, this is science fiction, and while it plays with many of the tropes of that genre, it is such a conceptually ambitious novel that I was sort of overwhelmed by how much is going on from chapter to chapter in terms of plot, world building, and political and philosophical grapplings. At the center of the novel is your protagonist, John Lakerman, who is a journalist for Donkey Wolf Media, which seems like a futuristic version of Vice circa 2010. So culture, politics, current affairs, etc., but maybe a bit more edgy and fun than the current breed of politically partisan news sources that make up the landscape of 2020's media. In any case, John starts out investigating a new pharmaceutical drug that leads him into a world of clones, body horror, augmented reality, climatological disaster, artificial intelligence, and so on. In all honesty, there were points at which this all seemed to go over my head, and yet the narrative was so compelling that I had to keep reading. So, my first question is a really basic one. How do you describe this book when you first meet someone and mention that you're an author and wrote a novel called How I Killed the Universal Man? And like, what was the catalyst to even write a book like this?
Well, usually I'm very bad at describing my own work, so I just tend to kind of mumble into my chest like
Go for it.
post-human noir. They say, "What's that?" I go, "I don't know. Can we change the subject?"
Well,
That's usually.
what
But
do you say post-human noir? I'm gonna fucking press back on you because you're on an interview thing with me, and that makes sense. I've heard other people describe it, but like, what the fuck is that?
well, post-humanism, I guess, is kind of like a relatively new school of thought. I mean, when I say relatively new, it's probably like 30, 40 years old. I don't know. But the book was very kind of inspired initially by this book I read by Catherine Hales. It's called How We Became Posthuman. Uh,
Okay.
and it's kind of the telling of like the birth of cybernetics as a practice and kind of AI and the kind of the drama around these kind of initial conferences they had about it with the kind of brilliantly named Norbert Wiener.
It's called
who's
named what?
Norbert Wiener. Norbert Wiener
Norbit
was like,
Wiener? Okay.
yeah, he's one of the driving forces of like early cybernetics.
Oh,
Uh,
sorry. I'm a little bit retarded, so I don't know who that is, but okay.
No, no, I mean I'd never heard of it. It's just a great name. And yeah, it kind of grew out. It took me a long time to realize or to accept that what I was writing was kind of science fiction. I don't know why it was such a kind of mental block. Well, as soon as I'd accepted, okay, this is a science fiction novel, then the rest kind of began to kind of come a little bit easier. So when I try to explain it to people, I just say that it's generally kind of to do with maybe like agency and identity and like the the first, I guess, driving thing. But I used to have a real kind of childhood fear of like that people could read my mind. Like I had a childhood fear of like
Okay.
telepathy. And so the novel kind of grew. Always wanted to write a novel about telepathy or something kind of to do with it. And then kind of just the general idea of the impossibility of that, or the impossibility of actually experiencing somebody else's uh, world, or because generally you see those things get represented as so kind of linguistic based. And I was like, yeah, but that's not how it would be to experience somebody else's thoughts. And so then,
That's a good point. I actually never considered that, like, especially in a media perspective, because you're right. All of the literature and films we have about that kind of would be just like the verbal thoughts or whatever, right? Or yeah, anyway, go on.
yeah, no, yeah, and I think that's why I always say kind of like I think this book in a way is a kind of about reading. I always try and like, I think kind of literature to kind of back to your introduction, why I keep doing it, yeah, compulsion. But I also think it is as a technology still like the closest way to experience somebody else's perspective, or it's so internalized, and the
Right.
language, has kind of can have like an emotional effect, which is so bizarre to think about. Uh, and so yeah, it kind of grew out of that really, the kind of obsession with wanting to know what would it be like to be kind of disembodied is always like a fantasy of disappearance I kind of have, I guess.
All right. I mean, that's a really good answer. Let me ask you another question. I read in an interview of yours that you structured this novel to be game-like. I assume you mean video game in this context. Excuse me. There's an actual game at the heart of the novel. It's what the title comes from. But you've also discussed this structure in regards to calling into question the reader's agency. I guess you just talked about this a little bit, but further, I read this quote from you wherein you state, the act of reading is an act of possession, and thinking about that in relation to games, where the illusion of choice often becomes a faculty of skill, was really productive when it came to structuring certain scenes in the novel. I'd love for you to further explain and maybe elaborate on what you mean by this.
I was thinking, I guess like my wife was a big Fallout fan, so I like would
Okay.
watch her play it quite a lot while I was writing. And I was always those kind of RPGs or something like the way that you structure your character uh, determines the freedom you will have in a game or the opportunities of freedom. And I guess one of the kind of other sort of big problems or kind of questions that kind of drive or I end up always writing about is in some way the kind of question of like free will and like because free will seems, it seems in a way so self-evident in terms of our experience of the world, but there's really very few good arguments for its existence. And so trying to think of like or make a distinction between like free will and agency to some extent, and the idea that maybe it can be free will might be something that's to some extent attainable through kind of like the possibility of conscious choice and which you kind of get in games, right? It's kind of a flatter choice, obviously, but
Right.
you have like your ability to kind of make decisions is based on how skilled you are. No, the decision to start with. So it seemed that there was a kind of corollary there that was potentially interesting, I guess.
I'm curious. if you thought about this in an aesthetic or structural sense too, because the novel does have this thing where like each chapter, John Lakerman, the protagonist, kind of like starts out at the beginning of a mission, which when I read that statement from you, I was not thinking of it as much as like an intellectual thing around agency and everything you described, but more like this is kind of a really fun concept in terms of how to structure the novel because it reminds me of those like choose your own adventure books that maybe I
Yeah,
read
yeah.
as a kid. I mean, obviously that's not what's happening here. This is a narrative that you've come up with and we kind of just go along with you, but I could sort of in retrospect visualize like reading the book as if I'm like jumping in into the mission or whatever.
Yeah. No, yeah, and that is kind of like that is intentional to some extent because like I've also, one of the things plot had never really been like something I'm particularly interested in or necessarily particularly good at. So this was a book I realized, it has to be because it's quite abstract in a lot of ways. The plot
Yeah,
has to be fun, like it has to be entertaining, like you would want to play it. Uh, and so yeah, the sort of rules for each chapter was, something kind of big has to happen each time. And also because it's kind of noir, it has that also that kind of inbuilt sense of like, oh, it's going to just kind of keep expanding and expanding until it runs out of energy, sort of entropy or
right.
whatever. Uh, and so yeah, the kind of chapters and the chapter titles all had to have this kind of sense of like promise to them as well. So yeah, I think the kind of entertainment is it was more foregrounded in my kind of thinking with it than usual.
As an aside, you mentioned your wife plays Fallout. I was a huge fan of Fallout 2 as a kid, and then I remember playing Fallout 3 in my 20s. Do you actually play like those kinds of
I
RPGs? I don't do this anymore because I'm
Yeah, no,
I
I mean I
work
don't
all the
have
time.
yeah, exactly. I don't have time to both don't really have time to play that much anymore, but I would I would kind of like I would watch them and I would always want like, oh, can you do something evil? But it was always like, oh, we're gonna play this as morally as possible. I was like, oh, please, can you just kill that person?
Fuck
Uh
yeah.
so yeah, I never really played it that much. I played it a bit, but I would like it's the kind of game I feel like, I would be typing away and kind of watching at the same time. So I would watch someone play like it was a TV thing, really.
Well, that's actually a very sweet glimpse into your relationship anyway. Okay. I'm gonna ask something else that's a little bit to do with that. This was like a complicated to come with a question, so I just started reading other interviews of yours. So, so I read another one of yours conducted by Chris Kelso, who, as an aside, is one of the sweetest people I've met in the horror slash sci-fi slash transgressive literature scene.
Yeah, he's so nice.
Yeah, he actually wrote the intro to one of my books. He started out the interview asking about your writing practice in the context of your non-literary career, i.e., your job, and in the context of being a father, something you both have in common. I'm interested in the transparency around how artists survive or make a living, because there seems to be, especially among young artists, this idea that you can, or rather should, be able to earn a great living solely on the basis of your art practice, and that you somehow failed if that art practice is not synonymous with your career. Further, I've encountered this idea that one can only truly have the time to engage with their art practice if it's also their job. I often point out that people have been writing poetry, making music, creating folk art, etc. for millennia, and very few people have made money, at least significant money, doing things like this. So why, when we think of more traditionally serious art practices, do we put so much pressure on the career aspect of this work? In my opinion, it seems quite ridiculous, actually, that someone should be spending 8 hours a day or more writing a book if they have a child to support, or a spouse, or even just themselves, unless obviously there's some commercial incentive to do that work. At the same time, I don't see why, if you have a practice that's important to you, that you can't find an hour every day or even 15 minutes where you can dip your toes in and make a little bit of progress. Anyway, that's my point of view. I'd love to hear yours, especially in the context of being a parent, as that's an experience I'm not yet familiar with.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I agree with a lot of what you said. I mean, it would be nice. I said it would like to be able to make enough money, but I know that, it's not possible. Or like, maybe at one point there might be something adjacent to it, like,
Sure.
because I have a teacher, I work in like a secondary school,
Okay.
uh, which
Do
is
you
also kind of tiring, like a
do you
state secondary.
teach English or
Yeah,
okay.
English, and yeah, I mean, finding the time to write is obviously, I think, always a struggle with kind of energy. And like, I tend to try to have like a couple of evenings a week where I'll focus on it. But that'll be from like, depending on what time the kids go to sleep. So it'll be from like, and after we've eaten, after you cleaned up. So, it's like usually from like 9 till like 12 and I fall asleep in front of the computer. So
Interesting.
it's always difficult. And I'm very slow as well. I'm not like somebody who writes fast. So but it's always been that way, so I just, you just have to accept it. I think if you want to make something, you're gonna, like you said, it's compulsion. You're gonna find the time to do it, and kind of questions of like success around it. I don't know. I've only ever wanted to make something that might mean the same to someone else as like a book is meant to me, and I think if it does that, then it's already as successful as it can be.
Couple follow-up questions here. Well, so in this practice of yours, like how long does it take you on average to write a book or specifically this book?
This book, let me see. Well, it's kind of like because the autodidacts I wrote, and it took me a long time, like maybe 6, 7 years, because like the first book, whatever.
Right.
Uh, and then this book also took me, like I wrote like a whole version of it, and I sent it off, like I saved up some money, and I sent it off to like an editor that they
Yeah.
recommended to me, and they like wrote back and were like, "Are you sure you want to be a writer? This is like unreadable." But I was like, "Yeah, that's all." I
I
paid them,
fucking
and
love that.
they couldn't even make it to the end of like what I said though. And I was like, oh, I was kind of like slightly internally crushed by it.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
brutal. All
it was
right.
it was by far the like most brutal thing that's like someone said to me. And at this point, the autodidacts hadn't been published or anything. It was just getting rejected from everyone. So I was like, do I even want to do this? Like, no, I don't know. And then obviously, just keep doing it anyway. So like you may as well try to enjoy it. Uh and I forgot what the question was actually. Sorry.
Well, I was just, it was the length of time. You sort of answered it,
Oh
but I was
yeah.
also, so like, how did it find its way to, who's the publisher? Whiskey Tit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was well, so it took about 5 years. It took about
Okay.
5 years for Hictom, and I think that's probably my working how long usually it will take me from now, from what I've seen. For Whiskey Tit, it was gradually with the other I kind of kept reworking it, and I think I sent it out too early, kind of the classic thing. I should have been
Yeah,
working
yeah,
on it
yeah.
for a long time before I was sending it out. And I think Compound Press rejected it, but they were like, "Oh, who might like this?" Uh, and then that was kind of nice, so I sent it to them, and yeah, just before I was kind of on the verge of giving up,
Hmm.
they were like, giving up sending it out. They were like, "Oh, we'd like to publish it."
Where are they based? Like who runs that?
They're in Vermont or just outside of New
Oh,
York. Yeah.
okay. So your work is the second or third title I've read from them, and now I'm kind of very impressed. I have these like initial concepts with a lot of presses or covers of books that like turn me off. And I have to say, like with Whiskey Tit, that's like one of those things where like I hate the name of the press. I think their logo is fucking stupid. And yet I'm like so blown away by the output now because like you and David Leo Rice are both these like super ambitious, super prose oriented, like very imaginative writers that I really, really respect. And so I'm like, okay, you guys are on to something. I don't know. My initial like aesthetic objection to this stuff is whatever. I guess it doesn't matter because whoever's curating this, I think, has really good taste. So I don't know. Who else is on that press?
There's Dave Fitzgerald, who's written like
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
he, yeah, he wrote Troll, which is I think is like a fantastic, like laugh out loud again, very prose oriented kind of novel. Yeah, he's fantastic. Who else is on there? Um, oh no, my mind's gone blank. This is so embarrassing. Uh, Jessie Bentner. She wrote a book, Child of Light, which is really beautiful. That I read
Okay.
recently. And there's somebody I'm forgetting, and I'm gonna kick myself afterwards, but it's gone.
It doesn't matter. Oh my God, there's another writer who I've met in person who's actually a sweetheart, and I'm blanking. I'm sorry. Well, hopefully he doesn't watch this. It's all right. Anyway,
Yeah, my memory is there, but yeah, I would say, yeah, I'm a big fan. Oh, everyone I've read from that I've really liked, but again, my reading is so slow now, especially since like we've had the second kid. It takes me months, so apologies to anyone that I've forgotten or haven't got around to reading yet.
no, it's okay. I mean, I've published with a few presses, and I still haven't read the majority of the people on there. It's kind of like I think with indie literature, I don't know if you feel this way. It's like you have to pick a few people. I mean, at the beginning, you're just exploring, but then you kind of pick a few people that you relate to, that you kind of communicate with online, and you're like interested in their stuff. And some people push their way into your world, but it's hard to, you can't read everyone. There's
Yeah,
too many
indeed.
fucking books coming out these days.
Well,
All right, I have, I don't know, at least another question. So let's go. Let's get back to discussing your novel. I'm interested in the way you write in relationship to the body. There's a lot of investigation into ideas of consciousness, the alteration of consciousness via drugs and virtual reality, integration and disintegration of self via cloning, the merging of the body with technology via nanobots and things like this, spontaneous mutations, etc. I'm curious as to where you pull your information on these subjects so as to have the material to play within your book. Meaning, is this all an amalgamation of other science fiction material, or are you interested in the workings of contemporary science? Like, i.e., do you pay attention to things like that? Further, there are so many questions posed in the book regarding the body and consciousness. In your life, have you come to any conclusions spiritually, philosophically, or otherwise?
oh wow.
Mhm.
I was at the time I was keeping just in terms of kind of like the research for it, I was just kind of following up various kind of stories. And so one of the big things that kind of fed into the novel and became something that I think conceptually thought about a lot was I was reading about like in MIT they were developing I was quite interested in the kind of brain signals for quadriplegics and people that
Yeah.
haven't been able to communicate and how that kind of gets transmitted and that through that I learned about kind of this thing in the body called Broca's area so that whenever you think the same muscles or something is activated in the area where you would speak and the idea of kind of that being able to be kind of retro-engineered or that's kind of one way that they are opening kind of communication up to people who are unable to. And then I also read about these things, kind of like biological xenobots or whatever that's they're working on that are kind of similar to set stem cells. And so that all of that kind of started to feed into it. And it kind of merged with like, the interest and kind of big data that I had at the time and its ability to kind of quantify and predict kind of behavior at like a mass scale. And so that when those two kind of merged, it sort of like became, oh, it's quite a potential here for something quite hellish to happen. I hope it's not the case. And also I found out, one of the research studies I was looking at about like Broca's area was being sponsored by like Mark Zuckerberg or something. And you're like, not sure
Yeah.
how altruistic this is going to
Yeah.
be. So, probably there's some element of corruption here. Um, and the other thing, the big inspiration for it, I think, or what kind of first put the whole thing in my mind was an exhibition by this guy called Haroon Farocki that I saw.
Okay.
I think most of his stuff is on YouTube as well. Some of it is, but it was called Serious Games, and it was this development of virtual reality therapy, which is kind of I think where the kind of idea of the drug initially being a antidepressant came from.
Yeah.
And it was people had developed for people from the first Iraq War these virtual reality simulators that would uh, recreate the situations that they'd found themselves in. Uh, or the kind of traumatic experiences they'd had. And behind they had some like incredible terminology, like the therapist was called the Wizard of Oz kind of therapist because they would be controlling the intensity of the experience.
So you're saying for there is therapy for veterans who have like PTSD and so forth, where they have them go through the
Yeah. It's
I've
like a
never heard of it.
virtual
That
reality.
sounds really fucked up, honestly.
Yeah,
But
yeah. I think it is like really
it-
fucked up.
is it effective in your research? Do you
I've not seen so much about it recently, so I'm guessing perhaps not.
they just like re-traumatize these poor people?
Yeah, I
All
guess
right,
maybe they like, oh, and then you didn't do that thing that's haunted you forever. What
do
if
you
you didn't?
do you have I have a quick question sort of in the midst of this because like there is a lot of stuff about artificial intelligence. Oh wow, what happened to my it's reframing me. Okay. There's a lot of discussion of artificial intelligence in the book, and it's kind of just a part of the world. And I think, given this takes place in some near or distant future, and thinking about our current world, I think it's not too far-fetched to assume that's something like that will happen. Maybe not like as fucked up as it could be worse than what you've written in your book, but it could also be better. I'm curious of, do you have like a moral position on AI? I think in the art scenes, people have a very knee-jerk reaction, especially to like generative stuff that interact with their art practice. They're like, but I'll just say I'm very agnostic about it, but I have a lot of anxiety around how it affects my future financially. But beyond that, I don't know. I'm just curious what your position is.
I think
Mm.
agnostic's probably a good way to describe it as well. I mean, I'm more concerned, I think, probably with like the environmental impact of
Yeah.
it and the way that that is kind of the ambition for it seems to constantly obscure what the cost could be. No, so I I I don't really have an issue. Like I don't, I don't want to read a book, an AI written by
Sure.
an AI. And I'm not particularly interested in somebody that or work that maybe use it, but it doesn't mean somebody couldn't do something interesting with it. I would never rule out the possibility that someone's going to come along and do something, interesting with it. So yeah, I would say also agnostic, but I think there's kind of obviously deep ethical concerns that we are not commonly able to legislate for or even perhaps conceive of. So
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, my position on all of that shit is that never stopped technology in the past, ethical concerns. And so
yeah,
you can get upset about it, but I'm not sure how much that's going to do anything. Especially like because now the way that we have traditionally had means to protest anything sort of doesn't work with digital functions. I mean, I guess we could all pull money out of using these applications, and yet they're, you know, because this is so much a part of life now, I think it's very, very difficult to make those kind of moves to create a dent. We can only sort of, if you're like anti-AI, you can only sort of hope for like a bubble to burst or like, something like
yeah.
that.
My fear is like, we'll all end up in sort of a new dark ages when everything goes down where we don't know how to do anything because I don't have a
Yeah.
YouTube to watch, like to show me how to do it. Because, basically the world may as well be magic. I don't know how anything works. I don't know what, I don't understand anything. So,
Yeah, I'm very much on the same page. I would be dead in 2 seconds in like an apocalyptic scenario. The most boring question I've saved for last. Who were your literary influences when you were growing up?
uh, well, I mean, Dennis Cooper was a big influence, a big kind of just in terms of like I find his writing so beautiful, the sentences. I think, there's so much kind of focus on the kind of transgressive element with his literature that a lot of like how like the beauty of how aesthetic the writing is and how unusual some of the kind of descriptions are. That was kind of that was like the first time I was like, oh, contemporary writing. This is something I've not seen
Uh,
before. And then before that, I was like, kind of typical, like, because it's like, yeah, like a lot of like Nietzsche and like classic kind of 16-year-old sort of philosophy. And then Mishima was a big influence for a while, but then I had to kind of really work to get it out of my system. It's sort of like, let me tell you like everything that's going, let me just tell you everything. And then J.G. Ballard was kind of like my entry into sort of more conceptual kind of, I guess, science fiction as well. Yeah, those were kind of the early ones for me, I guess.
That's cool. Do you have any thoughts about this is a weird, how do I pose this question? All right. When you talk about Dennis Cooper and even someone like Mishima and Ballard, I feel like a lot of people who are of my generation, and I'm gonna assume you're within, are you a millennial at least? Or no?
Yeah, just,
Yeah,
I
okay.
think.
Just okay. How old, can I ask how old you are?
43.
You're 43. Okay, yeah, we're very close in age. I'm 40. So I I've spoken to a number of like the heavy hitter indie lit people, like say like BR Yeager or whoever, especially the men who have mostly glommed on to like Dennis Cooper in their early or their teens and early adulthood and other writers like that. I think for me it's like Bret Easton Ellis was a massive influence. There's kind of this minimalist prose style that I think millennial writers like really locked into. And I've noticed in the past 2 to 5 years like the men specifically, how do I, is this a gendered thing? It might not be. It just might be like because I am a guy and whatever. I see everyone getting into like Laszlo Krasznahorkai and these sort of maximalist writers coming out of Europe. I guess you're in Europe. I'm in the United States. So to me, this is all very like exotic or something. Have you sensed any switch in influence or like what do you or no, does that not make any sense to you?
No, I think I see. I mean, there was a time I think I remember what was it like Old Lit or something where everybody was kind of writing in this like very like, short sentences, kind of like very yeah, I think there's definitely been, or at least it's not as homogenous now. Maybe that's probably
Right.
the case. I think there's more because I'm also I don't think particularly minimalistic kind of writing. I think I tried to write like that for a while, but it's just not
Yeah, you
it's
don't
not
do that actually. So that's I've noticed. Um yeah, I was trying to just think of this. I mean, this is a maybe like a dumb rabbit hole to go down, but I feel like let me say like 6 years ago there was such an explosion of this like sad girl writing especially from like Los Angeles and New York. It was like auto fiction of like women who are like very depressed and like going on sexual escapades, and like a lot of that stuff was circulating in the reading scene and getting into like the big five. And then I was like, it did feel like there was this weird, like, gendered split of what people were interested in. And I saw men getting into like, I don't know, who is uh the My Struggle guy, Carl
oh now
Nosgard, and yeah, yeah, all that shit. Anyway, maybe this is like a dumb conversation. Anyway, let's get back to you. What what else? What do you, we got like 6 minutes left. What you want, are you working on anything new? Or are you
Yeah, I'm working very slowly again, although I think I have like maybe 70,000 words of it, but it's all over the place. So we'll see. It's a novel about self-immolation, so obviously it's gonna sell well. I
fuck yeah. I mean,
imagine. Uh, yeah, it's gonna be, that's what I'm kind of working on. It's like gonna be like sort of five novellas that are sort of loosely interlinked, all about self-immolation. Again, I think about kind of like the idea of agency or kind of yeah some degree of free will but yeah, that's the main thing I'm working on. What are you working on at the moment?
I have a novel out I sent out to Ben at Apocalypse Party. We'll see if he wants it.
Oh,
I don't know
exciting.
yet. I sort of finished a draft of this a couple of years ago, and I've been working on a sequel, and so this is like a project that if it goes well, will be much more expansive than anything I've worked on. But also, I think this is going to be years and years in progress. So I don't know. We don't need to talk about me. Anyway, everyone who's listening to this should buy How I Killed the Universal Man. I would assume after reading this that I would also love The Autodidact. What is that book about? Can you give like a
It's
real
like
quick
it's
synopsis?
very different in many
Oh,
ways. I think kind of like it's not science fiction at all. It
it's
is.
not.
It has some element of like a surrealist or like some element of kind of like yeah. It's not necessarily realist either. It's kind of set between 1982 and uh like the 90s. So there's a
Okay.
big kind of gap between, and there's a kind of disappearance at the heart of it. I would say like if How I Killed the Man is kind of How I Killed the Universal Man is kind of about reading, then this one is about kind of writing. Like a lot of it's to do with like the structure of the novel is kind of the plot in many ways. So that makes it sound
All
very
right.
exciting. But it's
You
yeah,
wrote
it's
that one first, right? Autodidacts?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And
It's
didn't
it's
Dennis Cooper blurb that?
yeah, he did. Yeah. It's much
So,
more emotional. I think it's a more emotional kind of like,
okay.
or maybe less. I don't know. I like it. I like it, I think.
All right. Well, I'll try to fit it in. I don't know. Understand like the
Yeah, yeah,
TBR
I
stack.
understand totally. But yeah, I mean, if you do, let me know what you think.
All
But
right, 100%. Well, I loved this book. Thank you so
uh,
much for sending it to me. I really, really appreciate that. Sometimes I
no,
need a
thank
little
you.
nudge to get turned on to something cool, but I would say you're one of my new favorite writers from this world. So,
I'm already very
yeah,
pink and now I'm blushing.
great. I don't know. We got 3 minutes before my free Zoom kicks us off. I think this was a very wonderful conversation. Is there anything else you want to plug or talk about? Are you?
Oof. I don't know. Like, well, I think people should also buy David Leo Rice's The Berlin Wall. I think that's one of the best books I've read. Troll as well. I would also plug for
Yeah,
like for the
cool.
press. Those guys are, I think, yeah, great writers.
Are you friends with David?
Yeah, I got to meet him recently, actually. I
Oh,
went to
really?
New York for like the Brooklyn Book Fair. I was able to go out there for that, which is nice. And I met him and
Oh,
David
cool.
there. So that was cool. Yeah,
How
he's
how was the
just as like
festival?
eloquent as you would imagine. I don't know how
Yeah,
anyone can be so erudite, like in
he makes
person.
me feel very fucking stupid when I talk to
Yeah, I
him.
had the same reaction. I was like, I'm not sure how are you able to like riff on this so well. Yeah, they were super nice, and the festival was interesting. I don't do any like literary stuff like
Okay.
at all, so like I don't go to readings here. I don't know anybody here, so it was an interesting kind of experience for me. Like, yeah, we did one like reading at this like bookshop, and then like the person was like, oh, so what do you sort of do in London? I was like, "Oh, I don't do anything," and I was immediately aware that I'd ruined the mood. It's like, oh. We all sort of
Well,
look at our feet for a few seconds.
you're a father. You should be fucking like you should be taking care of your kid and writing books and having
Yeah.
a job. But I guess, you're allowed to have fun. Sorry, I don't know.
Well, I am doing those things, hopefully.
Yeah, okay. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. This was a pleasure. I
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really
will
enjoyed it.
hopefully be able to edit this in the next week or so. I don't know. I might get one up me and like do it ASAP. We'll see. But
All right. All right. Cheers, man. Thank you.
absolutely, have a good one.